Uprising. The Hungarian Revolution of 1956. The Hungarian Revolution of 1956, also known as the Hungarian Uprising, was a spontaneous nationwide revolt against the Soviet-imposed policies and government of the Hungarian People's Republic. This significant event in Cold War history not only illustrated the pervasive discontent with Soviet control in Eastern Europe, but also underscored the complexities of superpower dynamics during the period. The uprising began on October 23, 1956, and was brutally suppressed by Soviet forces by November 4, 1956. Despite its short duration, the revolution had a lasting impact on Hungary and the broader geopolitical landscape. The roots of the Hungarian Revolution lay in the oppressive political climate fostered by Mátyás Rákosi's Stalinist regime. Hungary, like many other Eastern Bloc countries, experienced severe political repression, economic hardship, and a lack of basic freedoms under Soviet domination. The death of Joseph Stalin in 1953 and the subsequent de-Stalinization efforts led by Nikita Khrushchev in the Soviet Union sparked hope for political reforms across Eastern Europe. However, Rákosi's hardline policies persisted, causing widespread dissatisfaction among the Hungarian populace. Intellectuals, students, and workers began to openly criticize the government, calling for greater political freedom, national independence, and economic reforms. The situation reached a boiling point when Khrushchev's secret speech in February 1956 denounced Stalin's excesses, indirectly encouraging dissidents in Hungary to voice their grievances more forcefully. The revolution was ignited by a student-led demonstration in Budapest on October 23, 1956. The students, inspired by recent political developments in Poland, and emboldened by a sense of solidarity, marched to the Hungarian parliament to present their demands. These demands included the withdrawal of Soviet troops, the establishment of a multi-party system, and the appointment of Imre Nagy, a reformist former prime minister, as the head of government. The demonstration swelled as workers and other citizens joined the cause, leading to clashes with the State Security Police, the AVH. The situation escalated rapidly, and the protest turned into a full-scale uprising. Demonstrators tore down symbols of Soviet domination, such as the statue of Stalin, and armed themselves with weapons seized from military depots. Imre Nagy, reinstated as prime minister, initially attempted to calm the situation by promising reforms. He announced Hungary's withdrawal from the Warsaw Pact and declared the country's neutrality, hoping to gain international support. However, his efforts were met with skepticism from both the Hungarian revolutionaries and the Soviet leadership. As the revolution gained momentum, it spread beyond Budapest to other cities and towns across Hungary. Revolutionary councils were formed, and local militias took control of government buildings. For a brief period, it seemed that the Hungarian people might achieve their aspirations for freedom and independence. The Soviet Union, alarmed by the possibility of losing control over Hungary and fearing the spread of anti-Soviet sentiment, decided to intervene militarily. On November 4, 1956, Soviet tanks and troops launched a massive assault on Budapest and other key locations. The Hungarian resistance, although courageous and determined, was no match for the overwhelming Soviet military force. The fighting resulted in significant casualties, with estimates of around 2,500 to 3,000 Hungarian civilians killed and thousands more wounded. Approximately 200,000 Hungarians fled the country as refugees, seeking asylum in the West. The revolution was crushed, and a pro-Soviet government was installed under János Kadar, who remained in power until 1988. The Hungarian Revolution of 1956 had profound and lasting implications. Internationally, it exposed the brutal realities of Soviet domination in Eastern Europe and highlighted the limitations of Western support for anti-communist movements within the Soviet sphere of influence. Although the United States and its allies expressed sympathy for the Hungarian cause, they were unwilling to intervene militarily, fearing a direct confrontation with the Soviet Union that could escalate into a nuclear war. In Hungary, the revolution left a deep scar on the national consciousness. The brutal suppression of the uprising reinforced the power of the Soviet Union but also sowed the seeds of future dissent. Over time, the memory of the revolution became a symbol of national resistance against foreign domination and a rallying point for subsequent movements for political change. The events of 1956 also influenced the trajectory of Soviet policies in Eastern Europe. The crackdown demonstrated the Soviet Union's determination to maintain control over its satellite states, yet it also forced the Kremlin to adopt more flexible and pragmatic approaches to governance within the Eastern Bloc. This included allowing limited economic reforms and some degree of political liberalization to maintain stability. The Hungarian Revolution of 1956 is a testament to the courage and resilience of the Hungarian people in their struggle for freedom and self-determination. Although it was ultimately unsuccessful in achieving immediate political change, the uprising had a lasting impact on Hungary and the wider world. It highlighted the inherent tensions within the Soviet system, and the growing desire for autonomy among Eastern European nations. The revolution remains a pivotal moment in Cold War history, symbolizing the universal quest for liberty and justice in the face of oppression. A struggle for identity and autonomy. The First Sudanese Civil War. The First Sudanese Civil War, also known as the Nyanya Rebellion, was a protracted and bloody conflict that lasted from 1955 to 1972. This war, which erupted even before Sudan gained formal independence, was rooted in deep-seated ethnic, religious, and economic disparities between the predominantly Arab and Muslim North and the African and Christian/animist South. We will explore the causes, major events, and the eventual resolution of the conflict, highlighting the enduring impact it has had on Sudanese society. The origins of the First Sudanese Civil War can be traced back to the colonial period when Sudan was under Anglo-Egyptian rule. The British administration implemented a policy of separate development for the North and the South, which exacerbated existing cultural and economic differences. The North, which was more developed and had greater political power, often marginalized the South. This divide was further deepened when Sudan achieved independence in 1956, with power being concentrated in the hands of northern elites who pursued policies that alienated the southern population. The southern Sudanese felt excluded from the political process, and deprived of economic opportunities. The imposition of Arabic as the official language and attempts to introduce Islamic laws further fueled southern grievances. The South sought greater autonomy and recognition of its distinct cultural and religious identity, demands that were consistently ignored by the central government. The conflict officially began on August 18, 1955, with a mutiny by southern soldiers in Torrit, Equatoria. The rebellion quickly spread, leading to widespread violence and the formation of the Nyanya movement, which sought to achieve southern independence. The term Nyanya means snake venom in the Madi language, symbolizing the fierce resistance of the southern rebels. The war was characterized by guerrilla tactics and brutal counterinsurgency measures. The Sudanese government, often with the support of foreign mercenaries, launched devastating campaigns against the southern rebels, resulting in significant civilian casualties and displacement. The South, although lacking in military resources, maintained a persistent and resilient resistance. The First Sudanese Civil War also saw significant international involvement, with various foreign powers supporting different sides to further their own strategic interests. The Cold War context played a crucial role in shaping these alliances. The Soviet Union and China provided support to the northern government, while Israel, seeking to weaken an Arab state, supported the southern rebels with weapons and training. Neighboring countries such as Ethiopia and Uganda also became involved, often providing refuge and support to the southern fighters. This external involvement turned the civil war into a proxy conflict, complicating efforts to reach a peaceful resolution. The prolonged conflict, and the mounting humanitarian crisis eventually led to calls for a negotiated settlement. The Addis Ababa Agreement, brokered by the World Council of Churches and the All-Africa Conference of Churches, was signed in 1972. This agreement granted significant autonomy to the southern region and ended 17 years of hostilities. The Addis Ababa Agreement was a landmark achievement, marking the first major peace agreement in Sudan's history. It provided for the creation of a southern Sudan autonomous region with its own regional government. The agreement also included provisions for power sharing, integration of rebel forces into the national army, and economic development in the south. While the Addis Ababa Agreement brought a decade of relative peace, it did not address the underlying issues that had caused the war. The agreement eventually collapsed in 1983, leading to the outbreak of the Second Sudanese Civil War, which lasted until 2005. The First Sudanese Civil War left an indelible mark on Sudanese society. It highlighted the deep divisions within the country, and the challenges of building a unified national identity. The conflict also set a precedent for future peace negotiations and highlighted the importance of addressing regional disparities and grievances. The war had a devastating impact on the South, resulting in significant loss of life, displacement, and economic hardship. However, it also fostered a strong sense of Southern identity and resistance, which ultimately contributed to the independence of South Sudan in 2011. The First Sudanese Civil War was a tragic chapter in Sudan's history, marked by intense violence and suffering. It was a conflict driven by deep-seated ethnic, religious, and economic divisions, exacerbated by colonial legacies and post-independence policies. The war and its aftermath underscore the importance of inclusive governance, equitable development, and respect for cultural diversity in preventing and resolving conflicts. As Sudan continues to navigate its complex political landscape, the lessons from this period remain relevant in the pursuit of lasting peace and stability. Khrushchev's Soviet reforms. The era of de-Stalinization. De-Stalinization refers to a series of political reforms in the Soviet Union following the death of Joseph Stalin in 1953 and the subsequent rise to power of Nikita Khrushchev. This transformative period aimed to dismantle the totalitarian structures and oppressive practices established under Stalin's regime, fostering a more liberal and humane approach to governance. Khrushchev's efforts to criticize and move away from Stalinist policies marked a significant shift in Soviet politics and had profound implications both domestically and internationally. One of the most notable events of the de-Stalinization era was Khrushchev's secret speech, delivered on February 25, 1956, at the 20th Congress of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. Officially titled, "On the Cult of Personality and Its Consequences," the speech condemned Stalin's brutal purges, arbitrary imprisonments, and the establishment of a personality cult. Khrushchev's denunciation of Stalin's crimes aimed to liberate the Communist Party and the Soviet state from the fear and repression that had characterized Stalin's rule. The motivation behind Khrushchev's speech has been widely debated among historians. Some argue that Khrushchev acted out of a moral conscience and a genuine desire to rectify the wrongs committed under Stalin. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, a prominent critic of the Soviet regime, suggested that Khrushchev's speech was driven by a movement of the heart to restore unity within the Communist Party and prevent a fatal loss of self-belief. Others, however, believe that the speech was a strategic move to shift blame away from the Communist Party and the ideology of Marxism-Leninism, placing the responsibility for the regime's excesses squarely on Stalin. This perspective suggests that by attacking Stalin, Khrushchev also sought to undermine his political rivals who had been closely associated with Stalin during the 1930s. Following the secret speech, Khrushchev implemented a range of political and social reforms aimed at dismantling the Stalinist system. One of the key areas of change was the Gulag system, a network of labor camps where millions of people had been imprisoned under Stalin. The process of releasing political prisoners began even before Khrushchev's speech, but it gained momentum afterward, leading to the eventual dismantling of many Gulag camps. The number of prisoners in the camps decreased significantly, and the living conditions for those who remained were improved. Another significant aspect of de-Stalinization was the cultural thaw that it initiated. This period saw a relaxation of censorship and a greater openness to cultural and intellectual expression. Writers, artists, and intellectuals who had been suppressed under Stalin were now able to explore new themes and ideas, leading to a flourishing of Soviet literature, cinema, and arts. This cultural revival played a crucial role in reshaping Soviet society and contributed to a more open and dynamic intellectual environment. De-Stalinization also had a profound impact on the Soviet Union's relationship with the Eastern Bloc countries. The relaxation of political repression and the move towards more liberal policies inspired similar movements in other socialist states. However, this process was not without its challenges. The most notable example was the Hungarian Revolution of 1956, where widespread discontent with the Stalinist regime led to a national uprising. The Soviet Union initially seemed to tolerate the changes, but eventually intervened militarily to crush the revolution, revealing the limits of Khrushchev's liberalization efforts and the complexities of maintaining control over the Eastern Bloc. Despite the initial enthusiasm for de-Stalinization, the process faced significant resistance from within the Communist Party and the broader Soviet society. Many party officials who had benefited from Stalin's system were reluctant to embrace the reforms. Additionally, the broader population, having lived under a repressive regime for decades, found it difficult to adjust to the rapid changes. This resistance slowed the pace of reforms and led to a more cautious approach in subsequent years. The historical assessment of de-Stalinization remains complex and multifaceted. On one hand, it represented a significant break from the brutal policies of Stalin's era, and laid the groundwork for a more humane and open Soviet society. On the other hand, the inconsistencies and limitations of the reforms, along with the harsh response to uprisings like the Hungarian Revolution, highlighted the inherent contradictions and challenges of transforming a deeply entrenched authoritarian system. In conclusion, de-Stalinization was a pivotal period in Soviet history that marked a departure from the oppressive practices of Stalin's regime. Through a series of political, social, and cultural reforms, Khrushchev sought to create a more liberal and dynamic Soviet Union. While the process faced significant challenges and resistance, it nonetheless had a lasting impact on Soviet society and its relationship with the Eastern Bloc. The legacy of de-Stalinization continues to be debated, reflecting the complexities and contradictions of this transformative era. Trouble in the Suez. The Second Arab-Israeli War. The Suez Crisis of 1956, also known as the Second Arab-Israeli War, was a diplomatic and military confrontation involving Egypt, Israel, France, and the United Kingdom, with significant implications for the geopolitical landscape of the Middle East and the broader Cold War context. We will explore the causes, key events, and consequences of the Suez Crisis, highlighting its impact on international relations and colonialism. The Suez Crisis was primarily triggered by the nationalization of the Suez Canal by Egyptian President Jamal Abdel Nasser on July 26, 1956. The canal, previously controlled by the Suez Canal Company, a joint British-French enterprise, was a crucial maritime route connecting the Mediterranean to the Red Sea, facilitating significant international trade, especially oil transportation from the Middle East to Europe. Nasser's decision to nationalize the canal was influenced by several factors. Firstly, it was a response to the withdrawal of American and British funding for the Aswan High Dam project, a key development initiative for Egypt. The withdrawal was partly due to Egypt's growing ties with the Soviet Union and recognition of the People's Republic of China. Secondly, Nasser sought to assert Egypt's sovereignty and reduce Western influence in the region, capitalizing on anti-colonial sentiments across the Arab world. The nationalization of the Suez Canal prompted immediate international backlash, particularly from Britain and France, who had substantial economic and strategic interests in the canal. Israel, concerned about its security and freedom of navigation, also viewed Nasser's move as a threat. Consequently, the three countries devised a secret plan, known as the Protocol of Sèvres, to retake control of the canal and topple Nasser. On October 29, 1956, Israel launched Operation Kadesh, invading the Sinai Peninsula. 2 days later, Britain and France issued an ultimatum to Egypt and Israel, demanding a ceasefire and withdrawal from the Canal Zone, which was ignored by Egypt. Subsequently, British and French forces commenced military operations, including airstrikes and a naval blockade. The military intervention faced significant international opposition, particularly from the United States and the Soviet Union. President Dwight D. Eisenhower's administration, concerned about escalating tensions during the Cold War, pressured Britain, France, and Israel to withdraw. Concurrently, the Soviet Union threatened military action against the aggressors, further intensifying global tensions. The Suez Crisis had far-reaching consequences for the involved parties and the international order. Firstly, it marked the decline of British and French influence in the Middle East and signaled the end of their roles as dominant colonial powers. The crisis exposed their inability to act unilaterally without American support, highlighting the shifting balance of power towards the United States and the Soviet Union. For Egypt and Nasser, the crisis was a political victory. Despite the military setbacks, Nasser emerged as a hero in the Arab world, bolstering his leadership and promoting pan-Arab nationalism. The crisis also solidified Egypt's control over the Suez Canal, ensuring its revenues for national development. In the broader context, the Suez Crisis underscored the effectiveness of the United Nations in conflict resolution. The UN's intervention, particularly the establishment of the United Nations Emergency Force, the UNEF, to supervise the ceasefire and withdrawal, demonstrated the potential of international diplomacy and peacekeeping. The Suez Crisis significantly impacted the dynamics of the Cold War. It illustrated the strategic importance of the Middle East, not only for its oil resources but also as a battleground for superpower influence. The crisis pushed Arab countries closer to the Soviet Union, which presented itself as a supporter of anti-colonial movements, thereby expanding its influence in the region. For the United States, the crisis was a turning point in its Middle Eastern policy. Recognizing the need to counter Soviet influence, the Eisenhower Doctrine was formulated, pledging American economic and military assistance to Middle Eastern countries resisting communism. This policy laid the groundwork for increased American involvement in the region, shaping its geopolitical landscape for decades to come. The Suez Crisis of 1956 was a pivotal event in 20th century history, highlighting the complexities of post-colonial politics and the intricacies of Cold War geopolitics. The crisis not only reshaped the Middle East but also redefined the roles of major powers in the international arena. Its legacy is reflected in the enduring strategic importance of the Suez Canal, and the ongoing geopolitical significance of the Middle East. The rise of Fidel Castro. The Cuban Revolution. The roots of the Cuban Revolution can be traced to the widespread discontent with the political and social conditions in Cuba during the 1950s. Under the authoritarian regime of President Fulgencio Batista, Cuba experienced severe inequality, rampant corruption, and the suppression of civil liberties. Batista, who seized power through a coup in 1952, ruled with an iron fist, and his government was seen as a puppet of American interests, particularly those of the United Fruit Company and the mafia-controlled Havana casinos. Economic disparity was stark, with the majority of the population living in poverty while a small elite enjoyed vast wealth. Rural areas were particularly neglected, and the lack of land reform left many peasants landless and impoverished. This environment of discontent created fertile ground for revolutionary ideas. Fidel Castro emerged as the central figure in the revolution. A lawyer by training, Castro initially pursued legal means to challenge Batista's regime but soon turned to armed struggle. In 1953, he led a failed attack on the Moncada barracks in Santiago de Cuba, which resulted in his imprisonment. Upon his release, Castro went into exile in Mexico, where he organized the 26th of July movement, named after the Moncada attack. Joined by notable figures such as Ernesto Che Guevara and his brother Raúl Castro, Fidel returned to Cuba in 1956 aboard the yacht Granma with a small band of revolutionaries. Despite suffering heavy losses upon landing, the survivors retreated to the Sierra Maestra Mountains, where they launched a guerrilla war against Batista's forces. The guerrilla warfare tactics employed by Castro and his followers proved highly effective. They utilized the difficult terrain of the Sierra Maestra to their advantage, conducting hit-and-run attacks on government forces. Over time, they garnered significant support from the rural population, who were disillusioned with Batista's regime. The revolutionaries' promises of land reform and social justice resonated with the peasants. As the revolutionary movement gained momentum, it attracted a diverse array of supporters, including students, intellectuals, and even segments of the middle class. Batista's increasingly brutal repression only fueled the revolutionary fervor. The tipping point came on New Year's Day in 1959 when Batista fled the country, and Castro's forces entered Havana triumphantly. Following the overthrow of Batista, Fidel Castro quickly moved to consolidate power and implement sweeping reforms. One of the first major actions was the nationalization of industries, and the expropriation of foreign-owned assets, which significantly impacted American businesses operating in Cuba. Land reforms were also enacted, redistributing land from wealthy landowners to landless peasants, fulfilling one of the revolution's key promises. The new government placed a strong emphasis on social programs, particularly in education and healthcare. Illiteracy was virtually eradicated through nationwide literacy campaigns, and healthcare became accessible to all citizens, leading to significant improvements in public health indicators. However, these reforms came at a cost. Political dissent was not tolerated, and many opponents of the regime were imprisoned or executed. The new government also aligned itself with the Soviet Union, leading to the establishment of a one-party socialist state, and further straining relations with the United States. The Cuban Revolution had profound implications beyond the island nation. It inspired leftist movements across Latin America and the globe, symbolizing the possibility of successful revolutionary struggle against oppressive regimes. Conversely, it alarmed the United States, which viewed the rise of a communist state so close to its shores as a direct threat to its security and sphere of influence. This tension culminated in the Bay of Pigs invasion in April 1961, when a CIA-sponsored paramilitary group of Cuban exiles attempted to overthrow Castro. The invasion failed disastrously, bolstering Castro's position and pushing Cuba closer to the Soviet Union. The most significant international crisis involving revolutionary Cuba was the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962. In response to U.S. attempts to overthrow his regime and the presence of American missiles in Turkey, Castro allowed the Soviet Union to install nuclear missiles in Cuba. This led to a tense standoff between the United States and the Soviet Union, bringing the world to the brink of nuclear war. The crisis was eventually resolved through negotiations, with the Soviet Union agreeing to remove its missiles from Cuba in exchange for the United States' promise not to invade the island and the removal of American missiles from Turkey. This event highlighted the strategic importance of Cuba in the Cold War, and the global impact of the Cuban Revolution. The legacy of the Cuban Revolution is complex and multifaceted. Domestically, it brought significant social improvements, but at the cost of political freedom. Internationally, it positioned Cuba as a symbol of resistance against imperialism, and a player in the Cold War. The revolution also had lasting cultural impacts, influencing art, literature, and music. Figures like Che Guevara became iconic symbols of rebellion and anti-imperialism worldwide. Today, the Cuban Revolution remains a contentious subject. Supporters laud its achievements in education, healthcare, and social equality, while critics point to its human rights abuses and economic difficulties. The revolution fundamentally transformed Cuban society and left an indelible mark on the global stage. In conclusion, the Cuban Revolution was a pivotal event that reshaped Cuba and had far-reaching implications for international relations during the Cold War era. Its legacy continues to evoke debate and analysis, underscoring its profound impact on the 20th century. The dawn of the space age. Sputnik 1. On October 4, 1957, the Soviet Union launched the world's first artificial satellite, Sputnik 1, into orbit. This historic event not only marked the beginning of the space age but also had profound implications for science, technology, and geopolitics. The successful deployment of Sputnik 1 ushered in a new era of space exploration, leading to significant advancements in various fields and triggering the space race between the United States and the Soviet Union. Sputnik 1, which means satellite or fellow traveler in Russian, was a spherical satellite with a diameter of 58 centimeters, about 23 inches, and a weight of approximately 83.6 kilograms, or 184 pounds. It was equipped with 4 external radio antennas to broadcast radio pulses. These signals could be received by radio operators around the world, allowing the satellite's progress to be tracked. The satellite was launched aboard an R-7 rocket from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan. The R-7 rocket, originally developed as an intercontinental ballistic missile, or ICBM, had been adapted for spaceflight. The launch was a remarkable technical achievement, considering the state of rocket technology at the time. Sputnik 1 was placed into a low Earth orbit, with an apogee, farthest point from Earth, of about 939 kilometers, or 583 miles, and a perigee, closest point to Earth, of 215 kilometers, or 134 miles. It traveled at a speed of approximately 29,000 kilometers per hour, or 18,000 miles per hour, completing an orbit every 96.2 minutes. Sputnik 1 provided valuable data about the density of the upper layers of the atmosphere, as its radio signals helped scientists study the ionosphere. The satellite's successful transmission of radio pulses demonstrated the feasibility of using artificial satellites for communication and scientific research. Furthermore, the data collected from its orbit allowed scientists to refine their understanding of atmospheric drag and its effects on satellite orbits. The success of Sputnik 1 also spurred rapid advancements in the field of space technology. Engineers and scientists gained insights into the challenges of satellite design, launch logistics, and tracking systems. These lessons laid the groundwork for future missions, including more sophisticated satellites, manned spaceflights, and interplanetary exploration. The launch of Sputnik 1 had significant geopolitical ramifications. At the height of the Cold War, the successful Soviet satellite launch was perceived as a demonstration of technological superiority over the United States. This event heightened fears of Soviet capabilities in missile technology and their potential military applications. In response, the United States accelerated its own space program, leading to the establishment of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, or NASA, in 1958. The space race between the United States and the Soviet Union became a central aspect of the Cold War rivalry. Each nation sought to achieve milestones in space exploration to demonstrate its scientific prowess and ideological superiority. This competition led to a series of significant achievements, including the launch of the first human, Yuri Gagarin, into space by the Soviet Union in 1961, and the Apollo 11 moon landing by the United States in 1969. Sputnik 1's launch had a profound cultural and psychological impact on people worldwide. The sight of the small beeping satellite orbiting the Earth captured the imagination of millions and inspired a sense of wonder about the possibilities of space exploration. It also fostered a sense of urgency and competitiveness, particularly in the United States, where the term Sputnik crisis was coined to describe the national anxiety over falling behind in technological advancement. The event influenced various aspects of culture, including literature, film, and education. Science fiction authors and filmmakers were inspired by the idea of space travel, and the potential for human exploration of other worlds. In the realm of education, there was a renewed emphasis on science and mathematics, as governments recognized the need to cultivate a new generation of scientists and engineers to compete in the space race. The legacy of Sputnik 1 endures to this day. It marked the beginning of an era where space exploration became a central focus of scientific and technological development. The satellite's success demonstrated the potential of space as a new frontier for human endeavor and sparked a wave of innovation that has led to remarkable achievements in space, science and technology. Sputnik 1's launch also set the stage for international cooperation in space exploration. While the early years of the space race were characterized by intense rivalry, subsequent decades have seen collaborative efforts, such as the International Space Station, the ISS, where scientists and astronauts from different countries work together to advance our understanding of space. In conclusion, the launch of Sputnik 1 was a watershed moment in history. It not only marked the dawn of the space age but also had profound and lasting impacts on science, technology, geopolitics, and culture. The legacy of Sputnik 1 continues to inspire and influence space exploration and serves as a reminder of the incredible achievements that can be realized through human ingenuity and determination. This is the final chapter of the post-war series. In future series we will cover the space programs of both the Soviet Union and the United States, as well as the Vietnam War, the Berlin crises, and the moon landings. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe.